Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Campion College's 35th Annual Nash Memorial Lecture. My name is Dr. Jan Pernis, and as the chair of this year's Nash Lecture Committee and a member of the Campion College faculty, it is my great pleasure and honor to MC tonight's event. The Nash Memorial Lecture Series was founded in 1979 to honor the first president of Campion College at the University of Regina, Father Peter Nash. The lectures are presented annually by people who have distinguished themselves in the areas of scholarship fostered by Father Nash, areas that are prominent at Jesuit institutions of higher learning: humanities, social and natural sciences, and the fine arts. I would like to acknowledge Campion College President Dr. John Meehan, who was instrumental in bringing Sister Helen to Regina, and Joanne Kozlowski and team who organized the event. I would also like to acknowledge special guests with us here tonight: Archbishop Daniel Bowen, Dr. Brian Hillis, President of Luther College, Dr. Terrence Downey, President of St. Thomas More College in Saskatoon, and representing the Regina Catholic Schools Division, our member of the Board of Trustees, Gerald Kleisinger, and Director Rob Curry, and Executive Director of Mother Teresa Middle School, Curtis Kleisinger. Now, to begin the lecture, I would like to invite Ruth Robillard to come forward and introduce our guest speaker tonight. Ruth is a former member of the Campion College Board of Regents and the Executive Director of Friends on the Outside, a support team for inmates at the Regina Provincial Correctional Center and their families.
Is it working? Testing. Seems dead. Okay. Good evening, friends. It is indeed an honor and a delight to be here with you this evening at Campion College, its 35th Annual Nash Memorial Lecture, and to introduce a woman of great courage and great faith. I congratulate Campion College for sponsoring these lectures annually. Father Peter Nash was a great priest, a great philosopher, but a great human being first and foremost. I had the privilege of attending his classes in the early 1960s, and don't start counting. And he was, I remember wandering into his office one morning, having a very bad cold, and he opens a desk drawer and says, "Here are the vitamin C capsules which you need." I went home with a bottle of vitamin C capsules, and I don't remember much of the philosophy class, but I do remember it worked for the cold. Pardon me. I again have a cold. And Sammy did give me an orange this morning, but it hasn't worked yet. This evening, we have the privilege to meet and to hear an extraordinary story, an extraordinary woman who has been in extraordinary places, because prison is no ordinary place. She is Sister Helen Prejean. Sister Helen grew up in Baton Rouge in Louisiana in the 40s and 50s. She herself admits she was raised in a privileged, well-to-do, solid Catholic family. She became a high school teacher for dropouts at Hope's House in New Orleans. And there she became familiar with the meaning of poor, the working poor, and the passion to help her fellow human beings took hold. She did not know that it would end her right back there in prison. It was in January of '82, That is, when someone asked her to become a pen pal with a death row inmate in Angola. The inmate's name was Pat Saunier. They corresponded for a brief while, and she notes how strange it felt to be addressing a letter to death row. She began began visiting Pat, and upon first seeing his face, she saw not a monster, but a human being face. However, Pat Saunier set the parameters immediately. Here was a nun. And how were we going to conduct this dialogue between us? He said, you know, can we talk regular and not with all that scripture talk? She agreed. And thus her work for social justice began. She could not and would not accept the state's plans to kill Pat Saunier in cold blood. She witnessed firsthand the heart of darkness within the criminal justice system and the state executions. I recall the words of Dominic Green from a book, A Saint on Death Row, where he says, let's not dehumanize ourselves by carrying out the death penalty. And those were exactly her sentiments. Her books, Dead Men Walking and The Death of Innocence, contain her stories, which will challenge every reader, every human being, and every government around the globe on the issue of capital punishment. It is said she dismantles the legal and religious arguments used all too often to justify the death penalty. And as Gandhi said at one point in his life, if everyone took an eye for an eye, the whole world would be filled with blind people. The prelude to her latest book begins from, and I like to read that. They killed a man with fire one night, strapped him in a wooden chair, and pumped electricity into his body until he was dead. His killing was a legal act because he had killed. No religious leaders protested the killing that night, but I was there. I saw it with my own eyes, and what I saw set my soul on fire, a fire that burns in me still. It's always been about fire. And yes, for Sister Helen, it has always been about fire and faith. She is truly our warrior and our heroine. Please welcome with me, Sister Helen Prejean.
Nice job, Ruth. Great job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, y'all. I'm from New Orleans, and this is quite an adjustment. Not the people are as warm as people in New Orleans, but believe me, when the pilot on the plane announced that it was 20 degrees below zero, I thought to myself, this is a religious experience for me. But there's one other person that we want to welcome tonight that has joined our family, and his name is Walter Vilbrun, who was released today from prison and drove from PA to us tonight. Walter, welcome. Thank you for all the things you could do in your first night of freedom, and you came here to us, and we are blessed. And all the guys from Photo that I met this morning who gave me this cross that I wear now, they blessed it, they held it for me, and I wear it here. It's a Jerusalem cross, but somebody looked at it and said, look, you can see the bars. You can see the bars of prison. Now I'm going to get away from this because this thing's too tall and I'm short. So I'm going to stand like this, and I want to tell you some stories. And it's the journey of faith is God leads us bit by bit by bit. Like, you know how you've seen a boat in a lock? So the water's at different levels, so the boat comes in, and then the water fills up, and then you go to the next level. Well, that's the way grace has worked in my life. And I'll bet if we had time, everybody could tell the story how when grace came and then we moved, we made decisions, we took turns, we embraced something we thought maybe we could never do. And that's the story I want to tell you tonight, just about waking up and how God's grace, first of all, wakes us up. And when you think about it, like we can't make ourselves get enlightened. Even the Jesuits can't make themselves. I mean, they have to pray just like everybody else and hope it comes. And so enlightenment in all the spiritual traditions, though, is always a gift. And so for me, it was to come to that deeper understanding of the gospel of Jesus, that the gospel is about justice and about being with the marginated and about being with people who don't have a voice, don't have agency. Because for a long time, I thought it meant being a good Catholic, meant, being charitable to people around you. Especially charity begins at home. So I was a teacher. 7th and 8th graders loved them, even boys, 8th grade boys, teaching them grammar. And just being in Mother Teresa's middle school today and being with those precious kids, God, it's like being in a room full of Alka-Seltzers. I mean, if you got the energy, you can, and I loved them. But then it started as a debate in the community, just like what happened to the Jesuits when Pedro Arrupe was the superior general. And there was a general chapter. And the call to every Jesuit was to be a man for justice, faith that does justice. Well, I thought faith meant believing in God, praying, and that God handled the big problems of the world. Like, what am I ever supposed to do about all the people starving in India? And, well, that's a God thing. You just say, God, please take care of the homeless people. Oh, God, take care of the people. I'm just going to do my little bit. Charity begins at home. And then I woke up. And that's the first part of the story of Dead Man Walking, was the waking up. And it was a talk given by a sister of Notre Dame de Namur to all of our sisters. I'm a CSJ, a sister of St. Joseph. We had all been hauled to Terre Haute, Indiana for these 3 days of talk by this social justice nun. And in the debate, I'd taken the side of the spiritual camp. Like, look, we nuns, we not social workers. How are we supposed to solve all these political problems? I'm not getting involved in politics. Just teach people about God. If the poor have God, they have everything. Even Jesus had said, the poor you'll always have with you. What are we supposed to do about poverty? That's a big thing. I pray for them. That's what I do. I'm a nun. I pray. I teach people about God. So let me tell you, this is what happens to you, see. So the first day of this conference, Maria Augusta Neal, who taught at Emmanuel College in Boston for 40 years, she taught sociology, so she knows what's happening on the ground with the real people, and the New Testament. And first day, she took us through the first, rich countries of the world and their GNP, and then poor countries of the world. Well, I know. She didn't tell me anything I didn't know. Enlightenment is not about knowing statistics necessarily. And then she announced the next day she's going to talk about Jesus. So I slept real well that night. I said, bring it on. I mean, I've been meditating on Jesus my entire life. I made the spiritual exercise of St. Ignatius. I was quiet for 30 days just talking to God and going through the spiritual exercises of Ignatius about following Christ more closely. Bring on Jesus. So here I am sitting, just like you sitting in here, and here she starts to talk about Jesus. And this is in Dead Man Walking. And I can give you the line that changed the spiritual trajectory of my life. And it was grace. It came in, and here's a line. And she said, Jesus preached good news to the poor. I went, yeah, I know what's coming next. How every hair of your head is numbered, how even a sparrow falls to the ground. And God is so close to us, we can call God Daddy, Abba. We can just turn in our hearts to talk to God. God's that close. And of course, that's true. But the point she made was integral to the good news to people who were poor was that they would be poor no longer. And Jesus didn't do that by political revolution. He did it by beginning to set up an alternative community of love where no one was left out and no one was in need. And we did that for the first 100 or so years in the church. And Christians were known by the way people loved each other, and those that had more than they needed shared. But when she said integral to the good news was that they'd be poor no longer, I guess in my mind, I had always thought, well, if people were poor, there was nothing too much you could do about that. And if they suffered with Jesus, then one day they're going to get a great reward, that they were beloved by God because they were poor. But I never thought to myself, poverty's not God's will. You know, you're just living in poverty and suffering, and your children dying because they don't have health care, or you don't have decent sanitation or a house, or the kind of education you get. That's not God's will. That's what we do. This is the way we set up things in our society. And poverty is to be resisted. And a really great Jesuit, one of the martyrs of the church, Ignacio Ellacuría, with the 6 Jesuits who were killed in El Salvador. You know why they were killed? Because they began to voice publicly the death squads and the disappearing of the people and the military killing of the people. And they raised their voices against that. And one night, they're taken out in the backyard along with their housekeeper and her daughter. And they're all shot and killed. And Ellacuría, I'm reading his stuff now. And it was all about how he was studying theology. Theology was you studying about God, but it's not looking at the harsh realities of people dying and people in poverty. So that, and that's the way I lived my spiritual life at first. And I was a good person. I was a good nun. I wasn't mean to kids, slapping around with rules or anything. I was just doing my best with what I knew. So the waking up was everything for me. And so when she said that line, integral to the good news is that they would be poor no longer, I got it that to follow Jesus was just what Pedro Arrupe said to the Jesuits. Faith that does justice. I didn't even know poor people. I'd grown up in Baton Rouge during the Jim Crow days in the South. Jim Crow. Strict segregation of the race. Sacred Heart Church. I go to Sacred Heart Church where I made my first communion. And black people had to sit way over to the right of the church, and they couldn't even sit with white people in the church. This is a body of Christ coming together to celebrate Eucharist, that we're all one. And little black kids had to make their first Holy Communion separate from the white kids. And here's the thing, I never questioned it. And that's what culture does. Culture gives us these signals, these lenses to see through, and the way we hear things. And I was told, well, honey, it's better for the races to stay separate for each other. I didn't even know the last names of Ellen and Jesse. Ellen worked in the house with Mom, and Jesse worked in the yard. And Mom and Daddy were always kind. And Daddy helped Ellen and Jesse get property, helped them get a house, helped Jesse get a job in the refinery. We had a servants' quarters behind our house. Ellen and Jesse lived in it, ate separately from the family. Never questioned it. And the gospel gives us eyes. It gives us ears. And one of my favorite things is that one of the first revelations of the heart of God in Scripture is in the book of Exodus, where Moses sees that bush burning, goes over that bush, and from within it, after the voice says, take off your sandals, this is holy ground, the first revelation of the heart of God, I have heard the cry of my people. I lived in the suburbs of New Orleans. We had 10 major housing projects in New Orleans, but I didn't hear the cry. I knew that there were poor people. I knew that black people had to go to substandard schools, but I didn't know how bad. I knew things weren't fair. But when I got it, that the gospel's about justice, I heard the cry. And so I moved out of the suburbs and moved into the St. Thomas housing projects, and African American people became my teachers. And Sister Laurie Schaff, who had begun Hope House there in the projects, one thing about when you wake up about justice, you're going to find out that people are already awakened before you. It's very humbling. I mean, here I am, hey, I'm awake, hey, ready to do something, you know. Sister Laurie Schaff had awakened 20 years ahead of me, and it started Hope House. And when I arrived, she said, now, Helen, you don't have to have a blueprint of how you're going to end poverty in the world. Just be neighbor and sit at the feet of the people and let the people teach you. All the rules seemed different, the way the police treated the young men. When I did the research for Dead Man Walking, I found there were more complaints to the Justice Department about police brutality in New Orleans than any other city. And then here are the kids coming into the Adult Learning Center who dropped out of high school. Well, how far did you get? Well, I was a junior. Oh, you only had one more year and you're going to graduate. So look, we're going to work with you individually, your reading, your English, your math. And a kid couldn't read a third grade book. He's a junior. An African-American kid in New Orleans, even if he had graduated from the school, he couldn't read. And it threw me back on that it's not that I was so blooming virtuous and good. It's that I'd been so cushioned and protected and resourced. I better roll up my sleeves and get in there because I'd been given so much. Went to excellent schools, an education to be educated, educare, draws you out to be able to use our gifts, to have a sense of agency in the world. And I got to meet a lot of the young people today. And they're learning social justice. It's already, they are learning it early. They're doing service projects. They're getting out of their little cocoon world, those that are privileged, to go. And there's nothing like meeting real people. And so I'm with Geraldine, whose child is sick and shivering with this fever. And I didn't know what it meant not to have health care. And I go with her to Charity Hospital. We go at 10 o'clock at night, sit in those little plastic chairs on that terrazzo floor till 3 o'clock in the morning when a young intern studying medicine at Tulane Medical School calls her name and sees her and her sick child. And you just wait. You wait. I've heard that what poverty does most of all is it reduces your options, reduces your choices. You might choose between this doctor or that if you have the resources. But when you're poor, you just wait. And you got it, Ruth. And that's what really set my heart on fire. I could see the suffering. I could see the helplessness of people. I could see the young men and what happened to them with the police. And it's not to say all the policemen are bad. Most policemen are good. But policemen are affected by the culture. And young man after young man after young man I was meeting in the St. Thomas housing projects when we'd have community meetings. Sometimes they would be brought in by the police and they call the nuns at Hope House, sister, they won't release me on my own recognizance. Would you talk to them? Would you tell them who I am? And so here these young black men having to have white women call the jail for them. And what did that do to their dignity and their pride? So while I'm there at Hope House, and I want to talk about Sneaky Jesus. I want to talk about Sneaky Jesus Part 1 and Sneaky Jesus Part 2. All right? So I'm learning. I'm reading the lives of the saints, and now I'm ready for the lives of the saints. I think we read the lives of the saints when we're ready for them. So I'm reading the life of Martin Luther King. I'm reading Dorothy Day, who started the Catholic Worker Houses, because now I'm ready to roll up my sleeves to do something. And reading about, Gandhi. And because I'm ready, I'm beginning to keep a journal. I'm beginning to learn how to write, because when I go in the suburbs, talk about the people in St. Thomas, people say, why don't those people get a job? Why don't those people keep their children in school? Why don't those people do all that littering? Kind of looking at it from, why don't those people? But now these are my neighbors. These are my friends. And that's when I learned how to write. how you can tell stories to bring people close so they can come to understand, to get inside people's skins and inside their shoes and inside their life. What would it be like to be raising your child? Then you're forced to send them to a public school. You're forced to live in public housing because you can't afford rent in another part of town, even though the drugs and guns and violence is everywhere. And one day, coming out of the Adult Learning Center, I was walking down St. Andrew Street. This is the way the book opens up, first page, first line of the book. And I meet somebody from the Louisiana Prison Coalition who was walking down the street, had a little clipboard. Anybody he bumped into that day, he's asking them to be part of this project. And he bumps into me. Sneaky Jesus Part 1. Hey, Sister Helen, you want to be a pen pal with somebody on death row? I said, yeah, sure. You know, I was an English major. I could write some nice letters, maybe send a poem. I didn't know they were going to kill this person. I thought I was just going to be writing letters. We hadn't had an execution in Louisiana in over 20 years. There'd been an unofficial moratorium on the death penalty, starting in the 60s, 70s, and now this is the early 80s. Sure, I could write a letter. Here. And just what Ruth said. So it's Pat Saunier, 90455, Death Row. I never in my life had addressed an envelope. I mean, it must be depressing to get mail when you see your address. But I wrote the man a letter. And you know what the trouble was? He wrote back. And there was an encounter. An encounter. He wrote, I wrote. He didn't even ask me for anything. He never asked me for money for cigarettes. He didn't ask me to come. He was just glad somebody had found him. And he was a Catholic, and I was a nun. And he'd say, Sister, just pray for me. But I found out through his letters, he didn't have anybody coming to see him. He had told his mama, Mama, don't come, because his mama mentally had gone through so much. She couldn't make herself walk into that building where they were going to kill her boy. And he understood that. And so I'm reading his letters, and then I'm meditating. In my meditation one morning, it was the gospel of the day, and how many times I could say it by heart. Matthew 25, I was hungry, you gave me to eat. I was thirsty, you gave me to drink. I was a stranger, you took me in. And then I come to the line. I was in prison and you came to me. You ever notice sometimes we read the scriptures, but sometimes the scriptures read us? And I'd always, when I came to that passage, I was in prison and you came to me, I'd always done my own little spin on the scriptures. You know how we do? If you know what I mean? You know, if you shy, you're in prison, you know? Like you go in that whole crowd of people, you don't know how to, that's a form of imprisonment, isn't it? I mean, I never thought I was in prison and you came to me. But now I know a human being, I'm getting the letters. And I thought I was just going to do a little end run. You know, I didn't think it was going to change my whole life, change what I do, bring me up to freezing Saskatchewan or wherever I'm going to go. I just think, hey, Pat, I'll come see you sometime. And here we come to Sneaky Jesus Part 2, because he's so excited in the return mail. It's all the visitor forms. And he says, oh, well, Sister Helen, I'm a Catholic and you're a nun. Would you be my spiritual advisor? So I was doing retreats. I was doing spiritual direction. So I said, yeah, fill out the form, you know. And I don't know that 2 years later, about 2 years, from the time I send that in, they're going to execute him at midnight, what Ruth was reading, which is the prelude to my spiritual journey that I'm writing. It's called River of Fire, that I'm writing next. Like it's a prequel, or it's the journey that led up to death row. That they were going to kill him in the electric chair at midnight. They're going to bring him to the death house 3 days ahead of time. And at 5:45 in the evening, everybody's got to leave the death house, his lawyers, everybody, except the spiritual advisor, who's going to be me. And that I'm going to be with him when the state of Louisiana kills him. And that's why I was talking about those locks and the grace. If I'd known what was waiting for me at the end of the road, I don't think I could have said yes. But you're writing a letter, and then you're visiting, and the fire starts coming from within. And then I'm there with him. when the state of Louisiana kills him. And he, in the end, tried to protect me and say, "Sister, you can't be there at the end because it could scar you to see this." It was the electric chair. They're going to pump 1,900 volts of electricity in his body. And he said, "Look, you've been with me. You've accompanied me. You've been there for me. You just pray for me, sister. You just pray God holds up my legs as I make that walk." In the second book, The Death of Innocence, I talk about a dialogue I got to have with Pope John Paul. And that was one of my questions to him. "Your Holiness, does the Catholic Church only uphold the dignity of innocent life?" And I get it. I'm for the seamless garment of life. I'm pro-life. From womb to tomb, from unborn children to people with Alzheimer's that don't even know their name. But do we only uphold the dignity of innocent life? Well, when I'm with a man and I'm walking with him to execution, he's made completely defenseless. His hands are handcuffed to a belt around his waist, leg irons, surrounded by 6 guards, walk like across this room or across this stage, and strapped down and killed. And he says, "Sister, please pray God holds up my legs as I make this walk." Where is the dignity in this death? And what changes the moral ground of it is to render a person defenseless and then take them out and kill them is what changes the moral ground of the discussion. And in The Death of Innocence, in the second book, you can read this for yourself. And if you want to go to the index and look up the Pope part and go to that first, be my guest. You can do that if you want. But if it's this dialogue and talking and having a dialogue with Pope John, it's because you're having it with the people all the time. It's no different to talk to the Pope than talk to each other because you're having the same conversation. And Vatican II taught us, what's the church? What's the heart of who the church is? Us, the people. The church is the people of God. And we have these experiences and the Spirit bubbles up in us and we share these with each other. And that's how we grow as a body. That's the way we develop. You don't think we always took a stand against slavery? I mean, especially in Louisiana, on the way to the prison, you can still see the churches where the plantation owners went to church. The white plantation owners, they went to church. Well, guess what gospel? Or guess what they're hearing of the gospel of Jesus when they went to church on Sunday? And they would quote the parts from St. Paul, "Slaves, be obedient to your masters." Not that these are human beings, but they were property. And the Constitution of the United States didn't even recognize that slaves were people. They were property. And so we begin because we live in society and we're part of it. We're part of culture. The gospel's inside us like sparks and like seeds and like moving us. And so we share with each other and we talk and we gather for Eucharist. We gather in liturgy. And sometimes we give an archbishop to be our leader or be our shepherd. But what a good archbishop does and what a good leader is gather the people and nurture the gifts of the people to be the church. That's what it's all about. Well, excuse that little riff. When I first go visit this man, and I go to the prison for the first time, I was real brave before I got to the prison, okay? And then I was standing there. I mean, because the nuns get a lot of respect in New Orleans. It's a very Catholic city. The Ursulines nuns had nursed people in yellow fever epidemic, and people got to ride the buses free. Our friend over there got that little piece of information. Nuns are a big deal in New Orleans. And now I'm standing in the visiting room of the Louisiana State Penitentiary, and they got this big green sign on the wall: by stepping onto prison property, you subject yourself to this search, this strip search, these dogs sniffing. And man, I went, oh man, I can't play the nun card here. They don't give a hoot that you're a nun here. And I was just out of my element. And both Susan Sarandon and Tim Robbins, who were both written an afterword in the book, The Dead Man Walking, when it was reissued in 2013, both of them said the nun was in over her head. And the nun was in over her head. I was going into territory I'd never been in before, and I was scared. And here this guard said, I'll take you to your man. And I'm walking, and they clanging these gates behind me. I went, I'm going in the belly of the beast. This is the belly of the beast. Where is this death row? We just kept going, clang, clang, clang. And then we rounded a corner, and I saw this green door with this little window in it with bars on it and red block letters right above it. And it said, death row. Then they locked me in a room, said, we'll go get your man for you. And then I started getting nervous about him because I was thinking, anybody can write nice letters. I've never been with a murder before. We're going to be together for 2 hours just like Ruth was saying. Are we going to be able to have a normal conversation? Can you talk? Murderer. And he's kind of thinking the same thing as I found out afterwards. He said, I'm going to meet this nun today to his brother. I hope we can have a normal conversation. We both are saying, I hope we can have a normal conversation. And then the guards brought him in. And it was that moment. You talk about a grace. Contemplation happens right in the midst of life. It's not just when we go off to meditate. Just kaboom. See through to it. And the guards brought him in. And I was behind this heavy metal grate. I could see through it. I was glad they had that heavy metal grate. I was. And I looked through that grate and looked into that face of this man, Patrick Saunier, who was writing the letters. And I went, oh my God, he's human. And he was smiling. And he said, sister, you made that long drive to come see me. Thank you. And the 2 hours flew by. Mostly I was a listening presence. And over these 25, 30 years of doing prison visits, I've accompanied 6 people to execution. I'm accompanying a man now on death row. That's the hub of the fire for me, is to stay close to the people. And I get out on the road to help wake up the people, to tell them about why we have to change this. But staying close to the people has got to be at the heart of it. And what I've learned is maybe the best gift we have to give each other is our presence. Because when you visit in prison, you can't say, well, let's go to a movie, or let's go get a pizza, or let's invite people in. And it's just the 2 of you. And it's just the prison walls and the floor. And you visit. And I've learned presence. It's what we really want more than anything else. Husbands and wives, children and parents, teachers and students, us with each other, to be totally present to each other. And so it's honed that skill in me. A lot of people say, well, doesn't it take a lot of courage for you to keep doing this? What keeps you going? That must have been asked 3 times today on that radio interview I was doing. What keeps you going? And it's the relationship with the people. Maybe one of your best gifts, John, is relationships with people. This is a 2-way street. This isn't a good white savior nun going to visit the poor condemned people, pouring grace on them, and leaving. I've learned so much from them and continue to learn from them. And as I did with those great men I met this morning, and Walter, whom I only have looked at for half of a second, but that man has been through experiences and can teach us, especially those of us who are privileged and been cushioned and protected and resourced. So the long and short of it is, here's this man, Pat Saunier, and I'm going to wait till he trusts me enough to tell me what he did. Because I don't deserve yet, I don't have the trust, say, now who'd you murder? Really. And but driving home, I thought, wow, I don't even know what he did yet. And I'm going to wait for that till he's ready. But I go to the Prison Coalition office after a couple of months because I don't want to be naive. I know somebody's been murdered. And I want to be able to stand in the presence of the suffering of the people too. So I go to the Prison Coalition and I say, look, I'm visiting with Pat Saunier and his brother Eddie, who had gotten a life sentence. And when you read the book of Dead Man Walking, you'll see how complex that situation is. and I can't get into it tonight. And I said, but can I have some of the background information on this case? And they say, sure, and they pull out all these file folders, and I open up the one on the top of the heap. And I'm going to use the image here. There are two arms on the cross. And the gospel of Jesus stretches us. Because on the arms, on one side is the perpetrator who has done an unspeakable crime sometimes, as this one is going to be. And on the other arm of the cross are the victim's family, like the LeBlanc family and the Bourque family, who when they woke up on a Friday morning and saw their kids leave to go to a football game that night, had no way of knowing it was going to be the last time they saw their children alive. And then I read how this young couple, David LeBlanc, 17 years old, Loretta Bourque, 18 years old, on November 4th, they'd gone to a football game on a Friday night, and afterwards had gone to a place to park near kind of an abandoned area near the sugarcane fields that are there in that part of Acadiana, near Lafayette and New Iberia and St. Martinville. And these two brothers are rabbit hunting in the field, and before the night's over, Loretta had been raped, and those kids are found lying in that sugarcane field, shot in the back of the head, execution style. And now I know what they did. And it's impossible to comprehend. And I was so horrified by it. And I'm thinking of their faces, how human they are. And here are these children, their whole lives in front of them. They leave the house. The LeBlancs remember David standing by the kitchen sink because Eula, his mama, had gotten him a new blue long sleeve velour shirt, and he's standing by the sink and he's rubbing the arm saying, oh mama, this is going to keep me warm tonight. And then his daddy's saying, yeah, but it couldn't keep him alive. And their lives are shattered. And now I'm in it. And the first thing I felt, the outrage. And you know, just dealing with this issue, just because you don't have the death penalty in Canada, don't think you don't have to deal with this issue. Because we can't help but feel outrage when innocent people have been killed. And it's ethical to feel outrage over the death of an innocent person. And I feel it. I go, my God, these two young kids, one 17, Loretta was only 18, and the parents sent their prom picture to the newspaper. And there they are standing there all beautiful on a happy night. And that headline, teenagers found murdered. And then guilt, because I thought, and I'm the spiritual advisor to the two people that killed those innocent kids. What am I doing? And then I made a very bad mistake. And later my editor, when I was working on the draft of Dead Man Walking, he helped me. And he said, Helen, it was cowardice. It was cowardice, wasn't it? You were scared, weren't you? Because I think of the parents. And the first thing I thought was, I ought to go see those parents. It's every parent's worst nightmare. Your kids leave and you never see them alive again. Whenever I'm talking to young people, I use the opportunity to say, that's why your parents say, call if you're going to be late. Because sometimes really bad things can happen to you. And so then I think of the parents, and then I think, oh, but they're not going to want to see me. I'm a spiritual advisor. Two people killed their kids. And I stayed away. I didn't do one thing. I didn't write them a note to say, I'm sorry about your son, your daughter, nothing. And I met them at the worst possible time you could meet the victim's family. It was a week before Pat Saulnier's execution. Eddie's death sentence had been removed by the Louisiana Supreme Court. It was early on. They don't remove any death sentences now, believe me. Where deep South states, they uphold those death sentences. As soon as the lawyers drive up to present the petition, they keep the motor running because you're going to have it stamped, approved. They don't even look at the cases. But in this case, I'm there. I didn't even write to them, and I meet them at the pardon board hearing 1 week before the execution, and it couldn't be more polarized. Because when you go to a pardon board or clemency hearing before someone's executed, when you walk in the door, you sign the book, literally what side you're on, life or death. I think it's probably the closest modern counterpart of being in that Roman amphitheater, putting your thumb up for somebody to live or your thumb down for somebody to die. And all the victims' families there with all their relatives and all their friends, because they've been told by the prosecutor, this is the last legal hoop you got to jump through to get your justice. And so they are packing the place. And I'm there. There are only 3 of us who signed the book on the life side to ask the clemency board not to kill Patrick Sonnier. Me, a lawyer, Millard Farmer, and a psychiatrist who wanted to testify that Pat Sonnier could live the rest of his days in prison and not be a threat to anybody. And that's when I met the families. And of course they saw me as an enemy. They hadn't met me at all before. I hadn't done anything for them. And they were furious at me. And we were walking outside, and I rounded the corner while the pardon board was voting inside. We had this break. We were walking outside, and I ran right into them. The Borks walked up first, who had lost their daughter. These families were all Catholic. And when they saw me, and I deserved their anger because I'd done it all wrong. And they actually treated themselves, really, with a lot of dignity because they walked past me in silence, didn't say a word, averted their gaze and walked by. And right behind them were the boys' parents, the LeBlancs. And I expected the same thing. And surprised by grace. Human beings have a way of popping out of the box. And Lloyd LeBlanc, the father of David, that's their only son, their family name died when their son was killed because he and Eula were too old to have other children. And he walks right up to me. And he goes, Sister Helen, I'm Lloyd LeBlanc, this is my wife. Sister, all this time you've been visiting with those 2 brothers and you never once came to see us? Sister, you can't believe the pressure we under with this death penalty thing. I don't know what he means by he's under pressure. I thought every victim's family would want to see the person get the death penalty. I mean, that's what they're offered. It's one of the tragedies and the moral bankruptcy to offer a family, what we're going to do for you. Now, hopefully you won't have to wait too long, but we're going to kill the one who killed your loved one, and we're going to let you send a representative to watch. And the watching of that is going to heal you or give you closure. But the word they always use is, it's going to give you justice. It's a way of honoring their dead loved one. And so Lloyd LeBlanc, all the grace was with him. I call him the hero of Dead Man Walking because he said, Sister, all this time you didn't come see us. Sister, I pray in this little chapel. Come pray with me. And that man in his graciousness reached out to me even though I'd done it all wrong. And I went in that little chapel in St. Martin of Tours Church in St. Martinville, Louisiana, where he kept vigil before the Blessed Sacrament from 4 to 5 in the morning. And prayed the rosary with him on a Friday, which is remembering the sufferings and agony. And I knelt alongside a father who was kneeling, who was praying through the agony and suffering and death of his own son. And this man, I call him the hero because he took me into his journey. How is it possible that you could go through such a tragedy in your life and you could emerge through it intact? And he said, Sister, when I said pressure on me, everybody I knew, everybody without exception, was saying to me, Lloyd, you got to be for the death penalty or look like you didn't love David. And everybody was saying that and said, Sister, I didn't have anybody, and you weren't there for me either. And he said, so I went there. I said, they're right. And I pictured in my mind pulling that switch on both of those brothers. And I pictured pulling that switch slowly. I wanted them to feel pain for what they had done to me. My wife almost lost Eula. My daughter, Vicky, the rest of our lives, taking David from us. And then he said, but I didn't like what was happening to me. And he put his hand out like this. And then finally, I kept praying, he said, asking Jesus, you got to help me. I know this isn't what you want me to do, but you got to help me. And he put his hand out and he said, and then I said, they killed our boy, but I'm not going to let them kill me. And he set his face to start going down the road of forgiveness. He was the first victim's family that taught me that what forgiveness is first and foremost is not the lifting of the burden of guilt of those who have hurt you. It might have that effect, but first and foremost, forgive. To give before, it was to save his own life. And maybe that's what Jesus meant when he said, love your enemies. To not let the love in us be overcome by the hate so we lose our own lives in the process. I've met many, many victims' families along this road over these years. And I get it. When the victim's family will come out with a V sign like this, we won, because somebody's gotten the death penalty. Boston's going through that right now. They have Jahar Sarnaev, the younger brother, and they're going for the death penalty. They can probably spend $50 million, and they're going for the death penalty. Why are they going for the death penalty? In a way, it's like a symbolic way of saying this is how we honor the ones who've been killed. What's different from honor killing? Does it make a difference that the state's doing it or the federal government's doing it? That in essence, what are we doing? So through Lloyd LeBlanc, I began to go to murder victims' family support groups, and then I got my shock on the other side of the spectrum, the other arm of the cross, because person after person in these groups said everybody stays away from us because they don't know what to do with our pain, and that they were being left alone. And so I did one thing. We started a murder victim support group in New Orleans called Survive. If we do one thing, one concrete action, St. Basil in the 4th century said, annunciations are frequent, incarnations are rare. So as to get that annunciation, but then to put it in flesh and blood, which is us, because we make Christ present in the world. It's our hands, our eyes, our voice. It's us. For Christ to be present, or Christ doesn't live in the world except through us. So I want to invite you to deep reflection on all this tonight. I invite you to read my book, because when you read, you're quiet. It's like a little retreat. You can go in your imagination to the places. You also will get information and learn about how the systems work, and perhaps go to a deeper place than you've been in your life. The gospel of Jesus, the one in the middle here, hung between these two poles, is always going to invite us to reconciliation. Never to buy into the polarization that our culture gives us. They're the enemy. It's us against the enemy. Only when we kill them can we be safe. Or the way your political discourse is going now, with this tough talk on, oh no, life sentences, we need to sentence them to death in prison, or they go for life and they never come out again. Think of that. What does it say about Canada? What does it say about the people of Canada? We have been made to be so afraid of people that they're going to get out and they're going to kill again. One time when I was standing with a guard while a family was saying goodbye to their loved one who was about to be executed, and he whispered to me, we were standing over apart from them, "Sister, the man we're killing tonight is a very different man from that young brash animal that came in here 20 years ago, cursing God and everyone. He's been reading, he's been reflecting, he's had a disciplined life, and we got to kill him anyway." So to throw people away forever, and when it starts coming into the political discourse, who are they representing? Who are going to be your people who are going to be thrown away forever? And our profile's really clear in the United States, and we're the biggest incarcerated in the world. 2.3 million people are incarcerated. My state, Louisiana, is the top incarcerated of all the states. And you look at who's in prison, 75% African Americans, and you see people with hose over their shoulders walking out to the fields, led by guards on horseback with guns, going to the cotton fields, going to the vegetable fields. Life sentences like you wouldn't believe. So they have a hospice unit and a geriatric ward because we let people die in prison. But not Canada. Not Canada. I love the Canadian people. I've come to school here. I know your national anthem. I can't do it in the French, but I do it in English. And we stand on guard for thee. So the gospel of Jesus is always going to wake us, and it always happens in community. And so we gather in community. We stay close in a faith community. And I'm glad for the presence of Campion, the Campion College, and the presence of the people here. And it's great that you came tonight. And Walter, we feel so blessed that you're here with us on your first night of freedom, that you came to us. So thank you. I just want to say I'll be there for you to sign books for you, and that I'll be happy till the cows come home to sign those books. And so thank you for getting the book.
Well, thank you very much, and I think we have time for a few questions. Yeah?
Great.
Okay, so we have microphones set up on these two aisles if people wanted to come forward. I can't see anything.
Questions
actually.
or comments? Maybe you got some
questions or
wisdom you want.
comments.
Can't have long speeches, I'm afraid. I did that. But if you got some, just a comment or a question.
Hello, sister. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I was wondering if you'd had a chance to look at the news today and see the joint editorial that came out from 4 Catholic publications.
That's big.
If you're familiar with it, would you just share with us a little bit about it and your thoughts and
Two big
anything you might
things.
know more
Great,
than I know?
thank you. Look at that knowledgeable young man. That's great. We have the Jesuit magazine, America, that tends to stress social justice and has been against the death penalty from the beginning, and National Catholic Reporter, which has stressed justice issues on one side. And on the other side, we have the National Catholic Register and our Sunday Visitor, which have not been really strong in opposing the death penalty. And I don't know how they pull this off, but they got all 4 of them to issue one statement for Catholics across the board against the death penalty. And that came out today. And not only that, but I also got the news that the Vatican, with Pope Francis in leadership, has issued a message to the United Nations for all countries in the world to abolish the death penalty. And you can be proud of your nation that you're in there. Thank you for that. Somebody else, y'all can come line up so we don't have to wait for you each time to go make your entrance to the mic. Are you imprisoned? Are you shy? Anybody? Question, comment, maybe from your seat even?
Oh, someone's coming there.
Making their way?
Thank you so much. I've had this on my calendar for months. It's fantastic to be here.
Great, I'm glad you are.
We live in a secular society. That's a reality. And it was so wonderful to hear you tonight speak so passionately and so openly about the gospel teachings.
Yeah, sure.
But we live in a secular society, and that is a reality. But how can we marry the two? How can we impart social justice? So important. I'm thrilled that you mentioned Dorothy Day. And I studying Dorothy Day, and I wrote about her section in my thesis the other night, and Peter Moore and the Catholic workers. So how can we marry the two and say it's okay, it's so important, we have to do everything that you're talking about and so much more, but we do live in a secular society, but it's okay to talk about the gospel and your motivations and some of our motivations for wanting to do more in a society that needs so much. Well, first of all,
we marry it in ourselves. Like Gandhi said, be the change we seek to make in the world. And so as we get steeped in the gospel and we get transformed and on fire, and we begin then to move, it doesn't mean that every time we're working with groups, we got to tell them about Jesus. We mirror it ourselves. And when they ask us, well, hey, what keeps you going? And then we share our faith. It's happened. Now, I gave a talk to the national gathering of the ACLU. They hear about Jesus. Everybody I'm with, because it's really integral to what happened to me. It was a religious and spiritual awakening about the gospel, that I was called to God, to justice, and not just to be kind and give out candied yams and turkeys to people on Thanksgiving, and I felt like I was helping the poor, and that was the end of it for the year. Or little presents for kids at Christmas to poor children, you know. But what's causing this? And we got to get in there. We got to get in with Aboriginal people and sit at their feet so that we can begin in solidarity to share the struggle. How many Aboriginal women have been disappeared and killed? How many? Over 1,000. So we need to build those bridges. And this place, Father John, Campion, of the young people, to get in there to meet real people who are not like us. We got to set up those bridges, whether it's going to be meeting together with people for breakfast, but we got to go over to them. Because we can't say, hey, y'all come, we're going to have a panel on Aboriginal people at our school. And we'd love to hear you share your experiences with us. What's it like to be Aboriginal? Really? We got to walk the path, and we have to learn and let them teach us so that we can be in solidarity with them. And everybody's got those gaps in their society. We all do. And Canada's not any different from the rest of us. Thank you.
Amen, sister. Could you talk a little bit about prison abolitionism and the restorative justice?
Yeah, sure.
That?
We can only go up in the United States toward restorative justice because we have punishment, pain, exile, and separation from families. We have made drugs. There's a woman, Michelle Alexander, The New Jim Crow. Have you heard of this book? She said, how do you have massive incarceration of people of color in the United States? 1 in every 3 young black men, ages 19 to 29, are in the prison system in the United States. 1 in every 3. And she said, what you do is you take drugs away from being a misdemeanor and you make them a felony. Now, many, many more white people than people of color do drugs in the United States, but the massive incarceration and arrest is people of color. And once you go in prison and you have felony on your record, when you go to get a job, they ask you, have you ever been convicted or been in prison for a felony? And they have to say yes. And you can't qualify for food stamps or public housing or anything because you have felony on your record. And that's why she calls it the new Jim Crow, because in some states you never vote again. And how do you ever get out of that? You're in that downward spiral and you stay in it. So by making drugs a felony, and we just do massive incarceration of people. Over 70% of people in prison, it's drug related or alcohol related. Same for your prison. I think you have 80%, huh? That it's related in some way to drugs or alcohol. Restorative justice means that we put our resources in getting with people, at-risk kids, or drug prevention, or alcohol prevention, or helping people who are in a spiral of poverty to break that cycle. Restorative justice, that's what the gospel of Jesus means. And so anyways, we start. Look at Mother Teresa Middle School. I met these kids, these beautiful kids. And I mean, those kids are going to make it. Those kids are going to make it because they got mentors and they got people believing in them and they following me even after they leave the school all the way to when they're going to get a job. And when I was with them today, I said, what do you like best about the school? And they said, the staff. I thought they had said the snacks. But it's the people, it's the teachers, and they also motivated, and it's a beautiful. We got to think creatively so that we can reach out to people. Oh, those kids are on their way in a downward spiral, and they're going to be the ones in prison. It's not going to be us. It's going to be them.
Time for just these last two.
Okay.
Glad we have you up here, Jane. Okay, yes, sir.
In your experience, what are your hopes for, or have you seen any change for the, I guess, abolition of the capital penalty in the States? Has it got better over the years?
No,
Is it getting worse?
No, we're beginning to see a big thaw at last. And it's constant education of people. You know, I did the book in '93. Roman Catholic nun writes a book on the death penalty. where support was at 80% in the United States. In the Deep South states, it was at 90%. And my book comes out. Now, what snowball's chance in hell does a nun's book have about the death penalty when we're at the peak of executions? But God acts. God uses our little bit, and we put it out there. And Susan Sarandon read the book. Susan Sarandon pestered Tim Robbins for 9 months till he read the book and did a film. And the film comes out. What chance does a film have on the death penalty going out in the middle of all the, when support was so high? Because it's a good film. It's a fair film. It brings you over the suffering on both sides. And then it got nominated for 4 Academy Awards. And 1.3 billion people are watching on the Feast of the Annunciation, March 25th, 1996. And Susan steps up to receive the Academy Award. Her first portrayal of nun, I can promise you that. And 1.3 billion people in the world 4 times hear about Dead Man Walking. And then it just takes a book and pops it up to the New York Times bestseller list for 31 weeks. You know the gospel stories where they said they stood in awe at the action of the deeds of God? I mean, we do our little part. All I did was do my little part. And then boom, whoosh, the big whoosh, the biggest whoosh, the God whoosh takes it. But what we're called to be is faithful. And when we wake up, to act. Because if we don't act, when we wake up about something, we're going to stay paralyzed. Oh, well, maybe I should do this, maybe I should do that. And then we keep working it in our minds and overthink it, and we don't end up doing anything. When we feel the Spirit move in us and we've awakened to do one act, to write a letter now to your MPs and say, don't go for it about tightening. Let them start hearing from people right away. Do one act. And action's liberating. The worst part, the hardest part, is trying to decide what to do for justice. And the minute we begin, and then we begin to associate with other people who are acting for justice. And then we stay faithful because we stay in community. And our Catholic faith gives us nurture, prayer, gathering for Eucharist, doing retreats, learning not only to meditate but to contemplate, to feel the closeness to God in our lives so that we learn to move with God as God beckons us to move. And it's a great, great blessing. I give a lot of talks to a lot of groups, but nothing's better than being in a faith community like I am tonight. And so I want to thank you for what you've given me while I'm here. And I look forward to meeting you individually around the book. So thank you. Thank you, Archbishop, for being here, being a presence to us. You are. Oh, we got one last one?
One last one?
Okay.
Yeah, a quick one.
I guess first I would like to thank you for your passion for justice. I think it's lit a fire in many of us tonight. I'm not Catholic, but I did spend a couple of years in the New York Catholic Worker in the, in the 1990s. This is a local issue, which for me at least has to do with justice and killing. In the fall, the provincial government introduced military training into our high schools, both Catholic, both Catholic and Protestant.
Oh, wow.
And I'm with a group that's been trying to, well, stop it. It did start in February, but and the kids are being offered $2,000 to take the course.
Oh, man.
So they're targeting, low-income kids from low-income families.
Oh, wow.
So, anyways, I just wanted to say that, I guess.
So, just to be aware of that, though, those educators mean that we got to really be getting in there for them to hear the gospel. So it's always going to be wheat and weeds coming together. And so here it is in society. But those of us who are educated, those of us who are parents, those of us who are older brothers and sisters to each other. So we have to, you can't stop society. We can try to do that, to start raising our voices. But what's a kid, coming up out of poverty, $2,000 to go take the training? Hey, I'm in. I mean, our army, our military, our ROTC in the United States is filled with poor people. And so thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, okay, here we go. Sister Helen, well, thank you all for your questions. Sister Helen, on behalf of the college and everyone here tonight, I would like to extend my sincere gratitude for your inspiring talk this evening. Campion, as you know, is a Jesuit institution, and as such, we strive to develop within our students a worldview that fosters a commitment to justice and a concern for the marginalized citizens of our society. Your commitment to finding humanity in all situations, along with your deep care and concern for the individual, is an example for all of us to follow. Your experiences give us pause to consider the human element, to understand the need for compassion and reconciliation, and to realize the fallibility of our man-made systems, especially when they fail to consider the former. Thank you very much again for being here with us tonight and sharing your journey. To show our appreciation, I would like to ask Ruth Robillard to come back up to the stage to come forward and present a gift to you.
On behalf of Friends on the Outside, this gift is just a very small token of our appreciation. We'll be forever thankful and grateful for what you have brought to Regina, yourself, with your stories.
Thank you.
Thank you. And, okay.
You want to open or explain what it is? It's very significant.
Here it is. Wow, it's got envelopes in there too. Let's see. Oh. Oh. Wow, look at that.
Can you explain?
This is a painting done by an inmate here at the Regina Correctional Center. And the painting features a child who sees the stars, all his dreams. Well, you know this, the symbolism of it with your work with children this morning, reaching out and having hope. And it's a small token of remembrance from us.
Thank you. I'll move to the books.
Thank you so much, Helen. Good job. Thank you. Yeah, we'll keep this for you.
All right.
So in closing, if you haven't had a chance to read Sister Helen's books, I encourage you to do so, and they're available for sale outside the auditorium, where you can also have your books signed. Also, please visit her website, sisterhelen.org. That concludes the formal program. Thank you all for joining us here tonight.